30 miles in a blizzard to deliver medicine. Alpha King breathed fire into her lungs. Amid the storm, a lone figure stumbled forward, her small frame bent beneath the weight of exhaustion. Ira, the omega of a distant village, pressed onward, her legs trembling with frostbite and fatigue. 30 miles behind her, the village lay silent under a blanket of white, its people waiting desperately for the medicine she carried. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each one visible in the frozen air, vanishing as quickly as hope seemed to flicker in her chest. She clutched the small bundle to her heart, wrapping it tightly in her cloak. The medicine inside could save dozens of lives, yet the storm threatened to steal her own. Snow stung her cheeks and eyes, her fingers had begun to numb, and her boots had long since filled with icy slush. Ira's mind drifted for a moment, remembering the faces of those she loved, faces pale with fever, children too weak to lift their heads. Her mother's gentle hand on her shoulder, her father's quiet encouragement before he fell to the plague her self-medicine could only fight if delivered in time. She had no choice. She could not fail them. The wind roared louder, almost like a beast, and the snow formed shapes around her, illusions or perhaps spirits born from the mountain curse. She shook her head violently. Focus. Keep moving. One step, then another. Her boots sank deep into the snow, and she nearly fell several times. Each time she caught herself on jagged stones, her fingers bleeding through the thin gloves she wore. Hours passed, though time felt like it had frozen itself alongside the world. Her legs screamed for rest, yet she pressed onward, driven by desperation and determination. Every heartbeat was a drum of courage. She whispered to herself in a trembling voice, "I will not let them die. I will not, I cannot." A howl pierced the blizzard, louder than the wind itself. It sent a shiver through her bones more than the cold ever could. Wolves, or something like them, prowled nearby, eyes glowing in the storm's dim light. Ira froze, holding her breath. A figure appeared through the snow, a massive wolf, its fur blending with the storm. But the creature was not like the ordinary wolves she knew. Its eyes were golden and intelligent, watching her with something almost human. Fear gripped her, yet she could not stop. "I mean no harm," she whispered, moving slowly. The wolf tilted its head and with a flick of its tail vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Her pulse thumped in her ears, but she could not linger. The blizzard was relentless, threatening to bury her under its cold, white hands. Hours merged into one endless battle with the storm. Her legs shook, her vision blurred, and at one point she sank to the ground, unable to move. Her hands had lost feeling, the medicine slipping slightly from her grip. She clutched it with renewed determination, tears freezing on her cheeks. She had survived the journey thus far, and she would not let death take her now. It was then that she saw it, the fortress. Jagged stone towers rose from the mountain like teeth, black against the storm. Its walls seemed to breathe, flickering with light and shadow, as if alive. Ira could barely comprehend it through the whipping snow, but she knew. This was the home of the Alpha King, Kalen, the fire-breathing ruler whose legend chilled the hearts of all who heard his name. Her body screamed at her to turn back, to collapse and wait for the storm to claim her, but something inside would not let her. The village depended on her. Lives hung in the balance. And whether she believed it or not, perhaps the Alpha King could help her survive the storm that had claimed so many. Her steps faltered as she neared the outer walls. The wind tore at her cloak, threatening to rip her from the mountain entirely. She fell to her knees in the snow, shivering violently. Her teeth chattered and her breath came in ragged gasps. She could barely see, barely move. The fortress loomed larger, a dark monolith against the night. And then, as if the storm itself obeyed the walls, a shadow detached itself from the battlements. Kalen. The Alpha King stood before her, or rather above her, a figure carved from darkness and flame. His cloak billowed in the wind, his eyes burning like molten gold even beneath the hood. There was no warmth in his gaze. Yet no cruelty, either. Just a raw, dangerous curiosity as he studied the trembling Omega before him. "Why are you here?" His voice was low, powerful like thunder rolling through a canyon. "You should be dead, and yet—" He did not finish. Instead, he stepped closer, each footfall silent against the snow. The air around him seemed to shimmer, and Ira realized with growing terror that he was the source of heat in the frozen landscape. I I had to bring the medicine," she gasped. "The village, they are dying." Her words were barely audible against the wind. Kalen's eyes narrowed, studying her with an intensity that made her shiver in ways unrelated to the cold. "And yet you crawl through my blizzard, alone, risking your life for them. Foolish, brave, or both." He extended a gloved hand, his golden gaze piercing into hers. Ira tried to rise, tried to reach for the warmth she could feel emanating from him, but her body refused. She collapsed into the snow, the storm pressing against her like a living wall. The Alpha King did not hesitate. He knelt beside her, placing a hand lightly on her chest. The heat from his body was unlike anything she had felt, powerful, burning, and almost unbearable. "Breathe," he commanded softly. Her chest heaved, but the cold had stolen her breath. She tried, but her lungs would not respond. Panic surged, and she felt herself slipping into darkness. Kalen's eyes flared, gold like fire against the snow. His hands moved with a precision born of ancient power, cupping her face, his thumb brushing the ice from her frozen cheeks. Then slowly, painfully, he exhaled. A rush of warm, golden fire entered her lungs. It was both agony and salvation, searing her chest even as it filled her with life. She gasped, coughing, choking, and then inhaled fully for the first time in hours. Tears mingled with the snow on her face, her body trembling uncontrollably. You saved me," she whispered, her voice hoarse and small. Kalen's expression softened just slightly before hardening again. "You are far braver than most," he said, almost to himself. "Far too stubborn for your own good." He helped her to her feet, his hand firm on her shoulder. She could feel the strength beneath his touch, the kind of strength that could crush mountains or save lives. Ira looked up at him, the snowstorm blurring everything around them except for the fire in his eyes. "I must reach the village, I cannot stop now," she said, voice trembling but resolute. Kalen's gaze swept over the frozen plains, then back to her. "The storm is no ordinary snow," he murmured. "It is cursed. Many who venture into it never return. You have survived this far, but the mountain does not forgive easily." Ira nodded, shivering despite the warmth from him. I must try," she said. "They are depending on me, I cannot fail." A long silence fell between them, broken only by the howl of the wind. Kalen's golden eyes studied her, a mix of frustration, awe, and something else she could not name. Finally, he said, "Go, I will watch. But beware, the storm is not the only thing that will test you tonight." Ira nodded again, swallowing fear and determination alike. She took her first steps into the blizzard once more, the snow biting into her face, the wind threatening to sweep her away. Yet she felt, somehow, a spark of hope. The Alpha King had given her life when the storm had tried to take it, and though she did not yet understand the depth of his power or his interest in her, she knew she could not turn back now. The fortress receded behind her, dark and imposing, yet a faint warmth lingered in her chest. She pressed forward, one foot after another, fighting the storm, the cold, and the creeping despair. Every step was agony, but each step was also proof that she could endure. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the village waited, and Ira, small and fragile yet unbroken, would deliver her medicine, no matter what the storm or the curse threw at her. And in the shadows above, Kalen watched, his eyes glowing like fire through the blizzard, knowing that this Omega, stubborn and defiant, had already begun to change him in ways he was not yet ready to admit. The wind howled louder, the snow swirled around her, and the journey had only just begun. Ira awoke to the warmth of fire she could not see. Her body ached as though every muscle had been torn and frozen at the same time. Blinking against the dim light, she realized she was no longer in the blizzard. Stone walls towered around her, carved with patterns that glowed faintly, like veins of gold running through rock. The air smelled of smoke and something sharp, metal, perhaps, or magic. Her chest heaved with every breath, and she realized with astonishment that her lungs were no longer filled with ice. She sat up, wincing as her legs trembled beneath her, and then she saw him. Kalen, the Alpha King, stood at the edge of the room, his cloak falling around him like shadows and fire combined. His eyes, golden and piercing, fixed on her with a mixture of intensity and caution. "You survived," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Few do." Ira swallowed hard, her voice rasping. "You saved me." Kalen's gaze softened briefly, though the fire in his eyes did not dim. "Do not mistake my actions for kindness. You were reckless, but something about your determination, it demanded my attention." Her heart fluttered at the sound of his words. She had expected anger, scorn, or indifference, not this acknowledgement. She tried to rise, but pain lanced through her legs and she collapsed back onto the floor. Kalen moved swiftly, his steps soundless, and caught her by the shoulders before she could fall again. "You cannot move yet," he said firmly. "The storm outside is deadly. Even the strongest would not survive it alone." Ira looked at him, her pride warring with her need. "I have to reach the village. People are dying. The medicine, they need it." Kalen studied her with an unreadable expression. Then, in a motion both swift and graceful, he knelt beside her and pressed his hands to her chest. A warmth spread from him, deep and steady, filling her lungs with life again. It was more than heat. It was power, raw and commanding, yet not cruel. Ira gasped, coughing, but each breath strengthened her. "You cannot force life from your body," Kalen said softly. "But I can lend you mine, just enough to survive, and perhaps to awaken something else in you." Her head spun with the intensity of it. Fire, yet not burning, warmth, yet not overwhelming. She felt her strength returning slowly, the ache in her chest easing. And with that, a flicker of awareness. The king's fire had touched more than her lungs. It had touched something deeper, her spirit. Why are you helping me?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Kalen did not answer immediately. His golden eyes were thoughtful, almost distant. "Because no one should crawl through a storm like that and be left to die," he finally said, "even if they are fragile." Ira flushed, the word striking her in a way she could not understand. Fragile. Perhaps, yes, in body, but not in heart, not in determination. She tried to speak, but Kalen's presence pressed in, heavy and commanding. Her words faltered. "You will rest here," Kalen said, rising and pacing the room like a predator in thought. "The storm outside is cursed. Not all of it is natural. The mountains have a will of their own. I should not have allowed you to reach this far. And yet, you did." Ira's gaze followed him, noting the strength in his shoulders, the careful precision of his movements, the fire that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. She had heard stories of the Alpha King, ruthless, unyielding, feared by all. Yet now, seeing him up close, she saw something else, a quiet weight of responsibility, a lonely power that seemed both terrifying and tragic. "Tell me," she said softly, gathering courage, why do you care? Why not let me die in the storm?" Kalen stopped, his expression hidden beneath shadows. His voice, when it came, was low and rough, like distant thunder. "I do not care in the way you think," he said, "but I cannot allow death to be wasted. Courage and stubbornness are worth preserving. Sometimes they are the only things that can break a curse." Ira's heart fluttered. A curse? She had heard whispers, rumors of the Alpha King's bloodline, cursed by the mountains themselves. Some said he could breathe fire because the magic ran through his veins, a blessing or a burden depending on the day. She shivered, part fear, part awe. "You mean me?" she asked. Kalen's gaze swept over her, and for a moment his golden eyes softened. "Yes. You are the one who has defied the storm, the one who refuses to yield." Ira's pulse quickened. She wanted to reach out to touch him, but her pride and the weight of his presence kept her still. Instead, she nodded, swallowing her fear. "I will deliver the medicine," she said. "I have to." Kalen's expression darkened, shadows flickering in the golden glow of his eyes. "And if the storm or something worse prevents you, will you survive?" Her lips trembled, but she nodded again. "I will try." He studied her for a long moment, and then, almost imperceptibly, he inclined his head. "Then you will have my eyes upon you," he said. "I will not leave you to the mercy of this cursed mountain." Ira felt something stir in her chest, gratitude, fear, something like hope. She had never met anyone who had looked at her like this, with such intensity and weight. And though she could not understand it yet, she knew the fire in his eyes would follow her, whether she wanted it to or not. The night passed slowly. Kalen remained near, sometimes sitting across the room, sometimes standing by the doorway, watching. Ira tried to rest, to gather strength, but sleep came in uneasy waves. Dreams of the storm haunted her. Snow that rose like walls, shadows that moved with intent, whispers of the mountains calling her name. And always at the edge of her vision, a golden glow, Kalen, watching, waiting, guarding. When she awoke again, the storm outside had not lessened. Snow whipped past the windows like spears, and the wind screamed its eternal lament. But Ira felt stronger, more alive than she had in days. The fire in her lungs had warmed her blood, and the resolve in her heart had strengthened. Kalen knelt beside her once more, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You will leave soon," he said. "The village depends on you. But know this, the mountain is not your only danger. Darkness walks in many forms tonight." Ira nodded, her resolve hardening. "I understand. I will face it." He did not speak again. Instead, he stepped back, his cloak swaying like liquid shadow, and gestured toward the door. "Go," he said. "I will watch and I will intervene if needed. But this is your path." Ira took a deep breath, gathering her cloak and the precious medicine. Her fingers trembled, but she held it tightly. With one last glance at the Alpha King, she stepped into the blizzard once more. The storm hit her like a living wall. Snow stung her skin and the wind tore at her cloak. Her legs screamed in protest and her lungs burned with effort. But through the pain, she felt something she had not felt before, a strange warmth in her chest, a tether to someone who had saved her life and given her courage to continue. Kalen's fire had left more than warmth. It had left a mark on her soul. Hours passed. Every step was a battle. The snow grew deeper, the wind more vicious, and shadows seemed to move with intent around her. Yet Ira pressed forward, driven by duty and something more, an unspoken connection to the Alpha King who had breathed life into her. At one point she stumbled and fell, the snow swallowing her. Her hands clawed at the icy ground, her breath ragged, her strength nearly gone. She thought of the village, the sick children, the villagers waiting for her medicine. And she thought of Kalen watching her from the fortress, his fire blazing in the storm. "I will not fail," she whispered through chattering teeth. "I cannot." Suddenly, movement in the storm caught her eye. A massive shadow, larger than any wolf she had ever seen, approached. Its eyes glowed golden like molten metal, and it prowled silently through the snow. Ira froze, her heart pounding. She realized with horror and awe that the Alpha King's power was not limited to fire. This creature, whatever it was drawn to her, perhaps sent by him, perhaps something else entirely. The shadow stopped a few feet away, its golden eyes fixed on her. The wind screamed louder, snow stinging her face, but Ira did not move. She could not. Her body refused, her mind caught between fear and fascination. And then she heard a voice, not spoken but felt, deep in her mind, commanding and gentle all at once. "You will not fall tonight." Ira's breath caught. The words were not Kalen's voice, yet they carried his fire, his power, his unyielding will. She felt the warmth spread through her chest, steadying her, giving her the strength to rise once more. The storm raged on, but Ira pressed forward, her legs trembling yet steady, her hands gripping the medicine as though it were her own heartbeat. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the village waited, and she would not fail. And somewhere above the blizzard, hidden in shadow and flame, Kaelin watched, knowing that the journey was only beginning, and that the bond between them, forged in fire and snow, would face trials far greater than the storm itself. Cliffhanger for Part 3. As Ira trudges toward the village, the golden-eyed shadow falls in behind her, silent yet powerful. She senses that the mountain's curse is not the only danger. Something ancient and dark stirs, and Kaelin's fire alone may not be enough to protect her. The storm had not relented. Snow swirled in blinding sheets, draping the mountains in an endless white veil. Ira's legs trembled beneath her, her cloak heavy with ice and slush. The medicine pressed against her chest, a fragile lifeline for the villagers waiting beyond the next ridge. She forced one foot in front of the other, refusing to look back at the fortress where Kaelin watched her. But she could feel him. Not physically, yet somehow, an unyielding presence lingered, like a fire in the distance, guiding her, protecting her. She shivered, not from the cold, but from a mixture of awe, fear, and something unfamiliar. A sense of being seen, truly seen, by the Alpha King. The blizzard twisted the landscape into strange, almost impossible shapes. Snowdrifts rose like walls, shadows stretched like hands reaching for her. At one point, Ira stumbled, nearly falling into a frozen crevice. Her fingers clawed at the icy ground, the medicine slipping slightly from her grip. Panic rose like a tide. I cannot fail. I will not fail. She pushed herself upright, pressing onward. Hours passed, or was it minutes? Time seemed meaningless in the storm. Her lips were cracked, her eyes raw, her muscles screaming for rest, yet she moved forward. Every step became a battle against the mountain, the wind, and the creeping despair. And then she felt it, the shadow again. Golden eyes, larger and more focused than the wolves she had seen before, followed her through the blizzard. She froze, heart hammering in her chest. The shadow moved closer, silent yet powerful, its presence almost comforting despite the unease it brought. "You are not alone," a voice whispered in her mind, low and commanding. Not spoken, but felt, strong, warm, unwavering. Ira's pulse quickened. She recognized it, though it was impossible. Kaelin. His fire, his will, had reached her here, across the storm, guarding her in a way that neither beast nor snow could. Somewhere deep in her chest, something stirred, an ember of courage, strengthened by the knowledge that she was being watched, protected. She took another step, then another. The shadow stayed behind, following, keeping silent watch. It was then that the mountain itself seemed to resist her. The snow hardened beneath her feet, forming jagged ridges that threatened to trip her. Strange whispers echoed through the blizzard, voices from the cursed peaks, voices of those who had tried to cross before her and failed. The whispers clawed at her mind, sowing fear and doubt. "Turn back. You cannot survive. You are too weak." Ira shook her head violently. "No," she whispered, teeth chattering. "I cannot. I will not fail them." She forced herself forward, letting her stubborn will carry her through the magical assault of wind and shadow. At the crest of a ridge, she stumbled and fell, sliding perilously down the icy slope. Her hands scraped against the frozen rock, her knees bleeding, her breath ragged. She tried to call out, but the wind swallowed her words. And then, through the white chaos, a figure emerged like fire incarnate. Kaelin. He moved with terrifying grace, stepping onto the snow as if it were solid ground beneath his feet, the storm bending around him. His eyes blazed gold, his presence radiating warmth and power, a stark contrast to the blizzard's icy wrath. Ira gasped, relief flooding her as he reached her in an instant, lifting her from the slope with ease. "You are reckless," he said, voice low but edged with something that made her heart skip. "Do you not value your life?" I have to deliver the medicine," she gasped, her body trembling with exhaustion. "The villagers, they need it." Kaelin's gaze softened slightly, though the golden fire in his eyes did not dim. "I know, and that is why I will not let the storm claim you." He carried her over the slope, his strength unwavering even as the wind tore at them. Ira felt warmth and safety in his presence, yet a flutter of fear lingered. She had never known a force like him, capable of both danger and protection. When he set her down on solid ground, she looked at him, awe and gratitude mixing with her exhaustion. How are you here?" she whispered. Kalen's gaze swept across the snow, then returned to her. "I told you I would watch, and I would intervene. Do not mistake my patience for weakness. The mountain respects strength. You have shown it enough to survive for now." The storm continued to rage, yet with Kalen by her side, Ira felt an ember of hope. She rose slowly, leaning on him for support. We must reach the village. They cannot wait." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yes, but you will walk beside me now. Alone, you would never survive the rest of this journey." As they moved forward together, Ira felt the shift in their bond. The Alpha King was no longer a distant figure, a legend of fear and fire. He was tangible, real, and watching over her with a vigilance that made her pulse quicken. And though she could not yet understand it fully, she sensed that something within Kalen had shifted as well. Something old, cold, and unyielding had softened in the presence of her courage. The path to the village grew steeper, the snow deeper. Shadows began to form along the edges of her vision, shapes darker and more threatening than before. The cursed mountain had not let her pass easily, and it was clear now that its defenses were growing stronger, more active. Whispers of frost and dark magic brushed her mind, attempting to weaken her resolve. "You feel it," Kalen said, almost a growl. "The curse is alive. It tests you because you have strength, and because it knows," his eyes flicked toward her, gold glimmering like molten metal, "that you could survive if left to your own devices." Ira shivered, both from cold and the weight of his gaze. I will not let it stop me," she said, voice trembling but firm. Kalen's hand brushed against hers, a fleeting contact, yet enough to anchor her. "Good," he said softly, "because the village is closer, but the curse will grow more dangerous as we near it. You must be ready to face it fully, and you are not alone." They pressed onward side by side as the shadows thickened and the snow seemed to rise like walls around them. At one point, a jagged figure of ice sprang from the ground, blocking their path. It moved with intent, sharp and glimmering, attacking with frozen limbs. Ira froze, fear tightening her chest. Kalen stepped forward, golden fire flaring from his eyes and hands, melting the ice creature before it could reach her. The heat warmed the air immediately around them, but did little to calm the storm. "You must learn to trust your strength," he said, turning toward her, his voice both commanding and gentle. "And trust me, alone neither of us would survive this cursed mountain." Ira nodded, the words settling deep in her heart. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that courage was not just in enduring the storm, but in letting someone else fight alongside her, in sharing the burden. Hours more passed, each step a battle, each shadow a test of courage. Slowly the landscape began to change, the snow thinning, the cursed shadows weakening, the mountain's roar growing distant. And then in the distance the village appeared. But what greeted her was not the simple, quiet settlement she had imagined. The village was frozen, encased in layers of black ice that shimmered unnaturally. Houses were shadowed and silent, smoke rising from chimneys that held no warmth. The plague's effect was magnified by magic, the curse of the mountains intertwined with a deeper darkness that Ira had not anticipated. Kalen's eyes narrowed, golden fire flaring as he studied the village. "This is worse than I imagined," he murmured. "The curse here has deep roots. Your medicine alone will not save them." Ira's heart sank. "Then, what do we do?" Kalen's gaze softened briefly as he looked at her, the first true hint of vulnerability flickering in his eyes. "We do this together," he said. "And we will face whatever this darkness has unleashed. You have courage and I have fire. Between us, we may yet survive and save them." Ira nodded, fear and determination warring in her chest. She clutched the medicine, knowing it was only part of what was needed. The other part, the power, the fire, the Alpha King, was here now, tangible, ready to face the darkness. They advanced together toward the cursed village, shadows shifting around them, magic crackling in the air. Ira's pulse thrummed with fear, but also with a strange exhilaration. She had survived the storm, faced the cursed mountains, and now stood at the edge of true danger. And beside her, Kaelin's golden eyes burned with a protective fire she could feel even in the coldest gusts. For the first time, she realized that the Alpha King was not only her protector. He was also a companion in courage, a force she could rely upon in the darkness. And as the cursed village loomed closer, she knew that the trials ahead would test not just her strength, but the bond forming between them, a bond born in fire and snow, tempered in courage and survival. The village lay before them, frozen under a strange, dark magic. Houses were encased in thick ice that shimmered unnaturally in the dim light. Windows glowed faintly, but no warmth emerged. The streets were silent, save for the crunch of snow beneath Ira and Kaelin's feet. The plague had claimed many lives already, and the cursed frost threatened to claim the rest. Ira clutched the medicine to her chest, her hands trembling, and looked at Kaelin. He stood tall, golden fire flickering in his eyes, casting a warmth that cut through the unnatural chill around them. She realized that this time, the storm, the mountain, and the curse were only part of what they would face. The darkness here was older, deeper, and far more dangerous. "Ira," Kaelin said, his voice low but steady. "The medicine will help, but it will not be enough. The curse has rooted itself in the village's heart. To break it, I must use my fire fully, and it will take everything I have." Her heart tightened. "Then we do it together," she said firmly. "Whatever it takes, we will save them." Kaelin studied her for a long moment. His golden eyes softened, but the fire behind them burned brighter, reflecting the depth of his power and the cost it demanded. "You are brave," he murmured, "perhaps too brave for your own good." Ira stepped closer, her small hand brushing against his. "Bravery is not enough alone," she said softly, "but courage shared, can be stronger than any curse." He said nothing, but the faintest curve of a smile touched his lips. Then, without another word, he began the ritual. The ground beneath him seemed to hum, and his body glowed with molten fire, golden and fierce. He raised his hands, and the heat spread, melting the frost closest to him, creating a protective circle around Ira and himself. "Stay close," he commanded. "This magic is ancient. It will test both our limits." Ira nodded, holding the medicine tightly. She felt the warmth of Kaelin's fire wash over her, steadying her trembling hands. The village seemed to shudder, as if sensing the challenge ahead. Shadows twisted in the corners of her vision, whispering threats in voices of ice. But she would not give in. She would not falter. Kaelin's fire flared brighter, and the air shimmered with raw energy. The ice around the village cracked, jagged lines spreading like lightning. But the curse was stubborn. The black frost clung to the houses, the streets, and the villagers' frozen forms. He could not break it with fire alone. "Ira," Kaelin said, his voice strained, "I need you to help me. Your courage, your will, it is part of the spell. Focus with me." She took a deep breath, closing her eyes, and let her thoughts center on the village. On the sick children, on the elders who had fought to protect their homes, on the families who had lost so much. She held the medicine like a beacon, imagining its life-giving warmth spreading through the frozen streets. Together, they poured their energy into the village, the Alpha King's fire and the Omega's courage combining like a wave against the shore. The black ice began to crack, shattering in jagged pieces that melted into the snow. Shadows hissed and twisted, resisting, but slowly they began to dissipate, retreating into the cold corners of the world. Ira opened her eyes and saw movement, villagers stirring under the thawing ice, coughing, blinking against the harsh light. Relief surged through her chest, almost too much to bear. But the battle was not over. A deep rumble echoed through the village, and the frost began to reform, blacker and stronger than before. Kalen's hands flared brighter, his golden fire scorching the ice, melting it with each pulse. Sweat dripped from his brow and his chest heaved. "Do not falter," he whispered to Ira. "I cannot hold it much longer." Ira nodded, feeling her own courage flare in response. "I will not," she said. "We are stronger together." The two of them advanced through the village, their combined energy breaking the curse piece by piece. Houses were freed from the black frost, children's breaths returned to warmth, and the plague's hold loosened with each step. Ira moved beside Kalen, her small frame steady against the power radiating from him, her courage acting as an anchor to his fire. At one point, a massive shard of black ice leapt from the ground toward them. Kalen's fire struck it midair, shattering it into harmless pieces. Ira flinched, but he caught her arm, steadying her. "Together," he said, and she nodded, drawing strength from his presence. Hours, or perhaps minutes, time had no meaning here, passed in a blur of light, heat, and courage. The village slowly emerged from its frozen prison. Smoke rose from chimneys, warmth returned to homes, and villagers stood, blinking and shivering, yet alive. Finally, Kalen and Ira stood in the village square, exhausted but victorious. The curse had been broken. The black frost lay in shattered remnants at their feet, powerless, defeated. Ira looked around at the villagers, some crying, some holding each other, all alive. Relief mingled with pride in her chest. She had made it. They had made it. Kalen lowered his hands, the fire dimming, and looked at her. His golden eyes were softer now, tinged with fatigue and something warmer, admiration perhaps, or gratitude. "You were remarkable," he said quietly. "Without your courage, none of this would have been possible." Ira shook her head, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "No, without your fire, none of this would have happened. We did it together." He studied her, a faint smile touching his lips. "Yes, together," he murmured. A silence fell between them, filled with the snow-melted calm of a village saved. And in that silence, something unspoken passed between them. A bond forged in fire and snow, in courage and strength, deeper than either had expected. "You should rest," Kalen said softly, breaking the quiet. "The storm is gone, the curse lifted, but your body has endured more than it should. Come inside, warm yourself." Ira nodded, allowing him to guide her to one of the freed houses. Inside, a fire crackled warmly and she sank into a chair, shivering from exhaustion but alive. Kalen knelt beside her, offering her water, his presence steady and comforting. "You risked everything," he said quietly. I could not allow you to die. Not like that, not alone." Ira looked up at him, her chest tight with gratitude and something more, something she could not yet name. You gave me life," she whispered. "You gave me courage. You saved more than just the villagers." Kalen's golden eyes softened. "And you gave me something I thought lost," he said, his voice low, almost vulnerable. "Your courage reminded me that fire alone is not enough, that hearts, too, can be strong." Ira's lips trembled and she reached out, resting her hand lightly on his. The warmth of his fire and the steadiness of his presence wrapped around her like a shield. "We make each other stronger," she said softly. For a long moment they sat together, the storm outside gone, the village alive, and the curse broken. In the quiet, a transformation had taken place, not just in the village but in them. Kalen, once distant and untouchable, had allowed connection to touch him. Ira, once fragile and alone, had discovered her courage was limitless when paired with trust and fire. Finally, Kalen rose, offering his hand. "Come," he said. "There is still much to do, but tonight we have one, and we have done it together." Ira took his hand, her grip firm, her heart steady. "Together," she echoed. Outside, the village breathed again. Smoke curled from chimneys, the snow softened into gentle flakes, and life returned to the streets. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the wind still whispered, hinting at future challenges, but for now, victory, warmth, and hope reigned. Kalen looked toward the horizon, his golden eyes blazing with determination and something softer, possibility. "If the world tests us again," he said, holding Ira's hand tightly, "I will face it, but only with you by my side." Ira nodded, feeling the truth of those words in her very bones. "And I will not let go," she said. The sun rose slowly over the village, golden light spilling across snow and rooftops, casting long shadows that danced like memories of the storm. Fire and courage, warmth and trust had broken the darkness. And as the first rays touched their faces, Ira realized that life, like snow and fire, could be harsh and cruel. But it could also be beautiful, shared, and eternal when hearts found one another in the midst of darkness. The village had been saved. The curse had been lifted. And two souls, forged in fire and snow, had found a bond that would endure far beyond the mountains and storms that had tested them.